The lights burned hot against the sleek pastel backdrop of the view. Cameras rolled in a flawless rhythm, catching every flicker of expression, every ripple of tension across the glossy table where 5 women sat poised. Millions at home expected the familiar routine: laughter, sharp banter, topical chatter delivered with the ease of daytime television. But not today. Across from Joy Behar sat Lady Gaga. She was not here as the glittering pop icon draped in sequins and spectacle, but as a woman carrying the weight of causes she had fought for with her voice, her body, her career. She wore an outfit as dramatic as her presence, bold, almost defiant, but her eyes told the real story. There was fire there, the restless energy of someone who knew this conversation would not be safe. Joy leaned forward, hands clasped on the desk like a prosecutor in her own courtroom. She had made her career on wit sharpened into steel, a comedian who had traded punchlines for political candor. And as she studied Gaga across the table, the dynamic was unmistakable. This was no casual interview. It was cross-examination. The studio audience felt it first, before a single word had even been exchanged. A hum in the air, nervous chuckles that didn't quite disguise unease. Even the cameras seemed to hover differently, as though anticipating the spectacle about to unfold. Lady Gaga shifted slightly in her chair, her posture regal but tense. She smiled, but not the rehearsed smile of a celebrity talk show guest. It was thinner, tighter, the kind of smile a defendant might flash on the witness stand before testimony. Then came the first spark. Joy's voice, low but edged with challenge, cut through the polite chatter. "You talk about changing the world through your music," she said, tone almost casual, but eyes sharp as a blade. "But isn't it fair to ask, where's the real sacrifice?" The room fans. L still. The question, simple on its surface, landed like a gavel strike. The words seemed to echo in the silence that followed. A flicker passed across Gaga's face, a tightening jaw, a flash in her eyes, as if the question had reached deeper than anyone expected. Her reply came slowly, deliberate. "I've put my life, my career, my body on the line for what I believe in," she said, her voice low but steady, trembling only with intensity. "Don't mistake my music for decoration. It's testimony." The audience erupted in applause, startled by the force of her words. But applause couldn't disguise the electricity between them. The exchange had crossed a threshold. The interview was gone. What remained was trial by fire. 2 women clashing in front of millions, each representing not just themselves, but the larger visions of America they carried like banners. Joy arched an eyebrow, unfazed by the applause, her smirk curling at the edge like a seasoned litigator who had gotten exactly what she wanted. She leaned back, almost smug, as though preparing her next strike. Meanwhile, Gaga straightened in her chair. Her breathing slowed, her hands resting firmly on the table, but her eyes stayed locked on Joy's, refusing to waver. This was not performance. It was defiance. The audience felt the shift. The atmosphere thickened, crackling like static before a storm. This was no longer daytime television. This was confrontation made spectacle. This was testimony, cross-examination, trial. And though no judge presided and no jury sat in pews, millions of Americans watching at home were about to become the jury. Somewhere in the control room, producers knew they had captured lightning in a bottle, but in the studio itself, there was no time to think of ratings. Only tension, only conflict, only the sense that the next words spoken would cut deeper than anyone anticipated. Lady Gaga in hiatus, Haled, steadying herself, eyes narrowing in preparation for what was to come. Joy Behar leaned forward again, lips parting with the precision of someone sharpening her next attack. The courtroom lights of daytime television burned hotter still. And the trial, unexpected, explosive, moral, had just begun. The silence after Gaga's opening rebuttal hung heavy. For a fleeting moment, it was unclear whether the exchange would retreat back into civility or spiral into something far sharper. Then Joy Behar leaned in, her hands pressing against the glass table as though anchoring herself in the role she had claimed. Prosecutor, interrogator, challenger. Her voice carried a veneer of humor, but beneath it was steel. "You've had your anthems, your foundation, your speeches. But at the end of the day, Lady Gaga, you still live behind guarded gates. You still walk red carpets. It's easy to tell America how to live when you don't share their burdens. The words, once again, sliced deeper than their casual tone suggested. The audience's laughter was absent now. Instead, heads tilted, eyes widened, breaths held. There it was. The essence of skepticism that many in the public harbored. Could an international superstar ever truly claim to stand shoulder to shoulder with the ordinary American? Lady Gaga's lips parted slightly, her breath sharp. She blinked once, gathering her thoughts, and then she leaned forward, narrowing the space between them like a witness refusing to shrink under cross-examination. "Do not confuse visibility with insulation," she said, voice steady but thick with conviction. "Fame doesn't make me immune to pain. If anything, it magnifies it." Her hand trembled slightly as she rested it on the desk, but she pressed on. "When I stood on the National Mall fighting for LGBTQ soldiers to serve openly, there weren't red carpets, there weren't bodyguards. There was fear. Fear of what might happen to me for standing in that place. But I showed up, because silence protects nobody." The room buzzed with applause, but Joy's face remained impassive, her expression somewhere between disbelief and defiance. She tilted her head, as though testing the strength of Gaga's words, as though waiting for them to collapse under their own weight. It was Whoopi Goldberg, seated between them, who raised her hand slightly in an effort to temper the exchange. "Ladies," she murmured, "let's keep this fair." But her voice was a gavel striking in vain. The trial had already begun, and neither side was willing to yield. Joy smiled thinly, her eyes narrowing with a flash of her trademark sarcasm. "You're passionate, I'll give you that," she said. "But passion isn't sacrifice. It's easy to speak in slogans. The real question is, what have you given up?" The question was less a query and more a dagger, aimed at the very core of Gaga's credibility. The audience shifted, uneasy but transfixed, as if awaiting a verdict that could reshape the entire narrative of the show. Gaga's response came with the unshakable clarity of someone who had rehearsed these truths not for television, but in the quiet, sleepless hours of her own life. "I have given up safety. I have given up privacy. I have stood on stages where men shouted slurs, where threats filled my inbox, where I could not step outside without knowing I was marked for what I believe." She paused, her voice softening, her eyes suddenly distant. "And I have carried the stories of fans who did not live to see tomorrow because the world told them they were less than human. That weight is my sacrifice." The studio was silent now. Even Joy for a moment seemed caught off guard by the rawness of the answer. The room's energy shifted again, the clashing visions of America crystallizing into stark relief. For Gaga, the fight was about empathy, about using her platform as a weapon for those who had none. For Behar, the fight was about skepticism, about demanding accountability from those who claimed moral authority without living the daily grind of the ordinary citizen. Both women stood, in essence, as embodiments of two Americas, one that yearned for hope and one that distrusted it. Joy broke the pause with a scoff, her words landing like another sharp objection. "Spare me the martyrdom," she said. "You still have a platform most activists would kill for. So don't tell me you've paid the same price." It was brutal, cutting, but it was also a sentiment whispered by critics across the nation. Could Gaga's sacrifices, however real, ever equal those of activists in the shadows, without fame, without protection? Gaga's face hardened. Her voice rose, not in volume but in intensity. "Privilege doesn't cancel sacrifice. It multiplies responsibility. I don't claim to suffer more than anyone, but I refuse to stand by while others suffer in silence. If my voice reaches millions, then millions are my responsibility." The audience erupted again, this time louder, a standing ovation threatening to break the fragile balance of the stage. Some clapped with tears in their eyes, others with clenched fists, as though Gaga's words had ignited something raw within them. Joy Behar, however, did not flinch. She simply folded her arms across her chest and smiled, the smile of a woman who had no intention of surrendering. And so, the opening arguments were laid bare before the nation. Gaga's conviction versus Joy's skepticism, compassion versus cynicism, hope versus doubt. The trial had truly begun, and the jury was the American public, watching with rapt attention. The studio lights seemed to dim, though they hadn't moved an inch. It was the atmosphere, heavy, anticipatory, as Lady Gaga inhaled, steadying herself against the desk, as though about to place her hand on a Bible before swearing an oath. Her voice dropped lower, less confrontational now, more deliberate. "If you want to know whether I've sacrificed," she said, "look at my record, not my albums, not my red carpets. Look at what I've stood for when nobody else wanted to stand." The words felt like a lawyer, presenting her first exhibit. She leaned forward, her eyes sweeping across the table, across the audience, across the cameras that beamed into millions of homes. "In 2010, I stood on the steps of the National Mall and demanded that Congress repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was 24 years old. I wasn't paid to be there. I wasn't shielded from the hate that came afterward. But I was there because LGBTQ soldiers were risking their lives while hiding who they were. That wasn't entertainment. That was a fight for their dignity." The audience clapped, a ripple at first, then swelling. Gaga raised her hand gently, calming them, her expression solemn. "I remember the death threats, the letters telling me to stay out of politics. I remember thinking maybe they'll blacklist me, maybe the radio will stop playing my music. But I also remember the faces of soldiers who told me my presence gave them courage to keep serving with pride. That's not performance, that's testimony." Joy's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Not yet. Gaga pressed on, her voice now resonant with memory. "In 2012, I launched the Born This Way Foundation with my mother. We didn't build it for PR. We built it because I was meeting young people, broken, scared, cutting themselves, taking their lives, because society told them they didn't belong. We raised millions for youth mental health. We sat in community centers. We listened to kids cry about being bullied until they couldn't breathe. I carried those stories with me on stage every night. And when the lights went down, they didn't disappear. They live inside me." She paused, her hand brushing the table as if grounding herself against the weight of the memories. The audience sat in silence now. No applause, no murmurs. Only stillness. Her tone shifted again, quieter but searing. "In 2016, I stood on the stage at the Academy Awards and sang Till It Happens to You. Behind me stood 50 survivors of sexual assault. Their hands shook, their tears ran. Some of them had never told their story before that moment, and they trusted me, to give them a voice. That wasn't art, that was justice." The room exploded with applause, standing this time. Some audience members had tears streaking their faces. The camera cut briefly to Joy Behar, her lips pressed tight, her eyes scanning the table as though recalculating her argument. Gaga let the ovation wash over her, but she did not smile. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I don't come here to play saint. I don't come here pretending I'm the only one who fights. But I will not sit here and let you tell me that my activism is decoration. I have carried the bruises, the threats, the exhaustion, and still I show up." Her words reverberated like a closing statement. Joy finally interjected, her voice slicing through the applause. "You've spoken out, sure, but that's the privilege of a platform. You've never been the one dragged off in handcuffs, never the one sleeping in a cell for your convictions. It's activism at a safe distance." The tension jolted back, the courtroom once again alive with combat. But Gaga's response was sharper now, stripped of hesitation. She leaned in so close the camera caught the fire in her eyes. "Safe. Do you think it's safe to open up about being sexually assaulted in front of the world? Do you think it's safe to use your fame to take on institutions bigger than you, wealthier than you, determined to destroy you? Fame isn't armor, Joy. It's a target." The audience erupted again, louder, raw. Shouts of agreement, applause breaking into cheers. Gaga raised her hand once more, silencing them with a single motion. "I didn't bleed on stage for the cameras. I bled because the causes I stand for are carved into my skin. Every scar is a reminder that this is not a performance. This is survival." Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the intensity of carrying too much for too long. And in that crack, the audience saw something unmistakable: authenticity. The air hung heavy again. The stage was no longer a talk show. It was testimony, exhibit after exhibit, layered in truth and memory, laid bare before a divided public. Joy shifted in her chair, her role as cross-examiner suddenly complicated. The more Gaga testified, the more the courtroom of public opinion tilted. Yet Joy knew cynicism had its own audience, and she would not yield without pressing harder. But for now, Gaga's evidence stood unchallenged, vivid, and unrelenting. The case had been laid out. Her activism was not decoration, but sacrifice. Her record not performance, but testimony. And the jury, America, was listening. The applause that followed Gaga's testimony still rippled through the studio, a wave of affirmation that seemed to buoy her. But as the sound softened, all eyes returned to Joy Behar. She sat with arms folded, her expression unmoved, a portrait of skepticism carved into the stage. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost measured, but sharpened with an edge honed over decades of verbal sparring. "You've got passion, Gaga. Nobody's questioning that. But passion doesn't equal sacrifice. You stood on the Mall, you sang at the Oscars, you built a foundation. All commendable. But let's not confuse visibility with vulnerability." The audience stirred uneasily, caught between admiration and doubt. Joy pressed forward, her words building momentum like a lawyer drilling holes into a witness's story. "You talk about fear, about threats, but you still go home to mansions, guarded by security. You don't clock in at a factory. You don't lose your job for marching in the streets. You don't sit in jail cells when the protests end. You play your part, and then you get to go home. That's not sacrifice, that's performance." The words struck the air like daggers, deliberate and brutal. Gaga's jaw tightened, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. For the first time, her eyes faltered, a flicker of hurt flashing before the mask of composure returned. Joy leaned in closer, her tone dripping with controlled derision. "Real activists, Gaga, aren't cushioned by fame. They aren't applauded when they speak out. They're silenced. They lose their families, their livelihoods, sometimes their lives. You, meanwhile, walk away with magazine covers and Grammys. Forgive me if I'm not convinced your activism costs you more than it rewards." The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath that rattled the room. Some shook their heads in protest, others nodded, emboldened by Joy's attack. The studio had split into factions, the ideological jury divided down invisible lines. Gaga swallowed, her throat bobbing as though she were steadying herself for another round. But Joy wasn't finished. She pressed on, her voice rising with the rhythm of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. "You've made millions singing about empowerment, about being born this way. That's not charity. That's commerce. You profit from people's pain, from their need to believe in a savior. And then you sit here, telling us about scars, as if your pain is the same as theirs. It isn't. It never will be." The words detonated in the air. Gaga's hands trembled visibly now. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, as though absorbing the blow, her breath sharp and shallow. A woman in the audience shouted, "That's not fair!" Applause and boos collided in chaotic echoes, the soundboard of public opinion exploding live on national television. Whoopi Goldberg, caught in the middle, raised both hands like a judge trying to restore order. All right. Let's take it down a notch," she urged, her voice booming with authority. But her words barely pierced the storm. Joy's gaze stayed locked on Gaga, unflinching. "You want to be taken seriously as an activist? Then admit the truth. Your sacrifice is symbolic. You don't live the consequences. You narrate them." For a moment, Gaga did not reply. She sat still, her eyes wet but unwavering, her silence heavier than any argument she could muster. It was the silence of someone who had been accused not just of hypocrisy, but of betrayal, of exploiting the very causes she sought to defend. The audience leaned forward, some whispering, others clutching their chests. It felt less like a talk show than a trial. The witness grilled until there was nothing left but either collapse or defiance. Finally, Gaga's lips parted, her voice low, fragile yet cutting. "You think I profit from their pain? I carry it. I carry it until I can't sleep, until I vomit from the weight of it. I carry it when the lights are off, when nobody's watching, when I can't breathe from the guilt of still being alive while others are gone." Her words trembled, but her eyes lifted, hardening with fury. "Don't you dare tell me that my sacrifice is symbolic. Don't you dare strip away the blood, the fear, the nights I thought I wouldn't survive. You think fame is a shield, fame is a noose, and I wear it every day, by choice because someone has to." The studio erupted again. Thunderous applause, shouts, the sound of feet stomping the floor. Some audience members stood, tears running down their cheeks, while others crossed their arms, still unconvinced. The fracture deepened, each side claiming its own truth. Joy smirked faintly, leaning back as if satisfied. "There it is," she said, almost smug. "The martyrdom I was talking about. Maybe you believe it, Gaga. Maybe. But belief isn't proof. And when the cameras shut off, we both know your life goes on. The rest of us, we live with the consequences." The audience booed, the clash of voices rising louder still. Whoopi slammed her hand on the table, desperate to regain control. "Enough! We are not a courtroom. We are not here to destroy each other." But the truth was undeniable. The stage had become a courtroom, and Joy had delivered her cross-examination with the precision of a seasoned litigator. She had torn at Gaga's testimony, questioned her credibility, and planted seeds of doubt in the jury of public opinion. Whether those seeds would grow into conviction or collapse was uncertain. What was certain was this: the confrontation had escalated beyond the point of no return. The trial was no longer about what Lady Gaga had done. It was about who she was, and whether America believed her. The tension had become unbearable, a rope pulled so taut that the faintest tug might snap it in two. Gaga's eyes glistened, her voice still trembling from Joy's cross-examination. While Joy sat back with folded arms, her smirk sharpened into something bordering on disdain. The studio air felt heavier, as though the oxygen itself carried the weight of expectation. The audience shifted restlessly, torn between sympathy and suspicion, their whispers fluttering through the room like nervous birds trapped in a cage. Joy leaned forward again, the smirk giving way to a thin smile of certy. "Auntie, you want us to believe that fame is a noose? That's poetic, Gaga, but not convincing. The truth is, your activism ends when the cameras stop rolling, because when the lights go off, you're not in the trenches, you're not marching with the people, you're flying first class to the next show." The words detonated like dynamite. The audience gasped, sharp, disbelieving, some even booing audibly, but others clapped, emboldened by the bluntness, their nods signaling allegiance to Joy's cynicism. Gaga's entire body stiffened. Her chest rose and fell with quickened breaths, her fingers curling into fists against the glass table. Her voice, when it came, was no longer the measured cadence of testimony. It was thunder, raw, uncontrolled, unfiltered. "The cameras," she snapped, her voice rising over the din, "are exactly where this fight belongs. Silence doesn't protect anyone. You want me to disappear into the shadows? To whisper about injustice in back rooms where nobody hears? That's not activism. That's complicity." The audience roared, clapping, shouting. Some stood, fists raised, chanting her name. Others sat stone still, arms folded like jurors refusing to be swayed. Joy didn't flinch. She tapped her fingers against the desk, waiting for the applause to die down, her expression a mask of unimpressed patience. Then, with surgical precision, she delivered her next strike. "Don't mistake visibility for virtue. You're not risking your life out there. You're monetizing your message. And let's be honest, if it weren't for the music, for the fame, nobody would be listening." The words cut through the applause like a blade. The room hushed again, silence reclaiming its throne. Gaga's nostrils flared, her teeth clenched. Her hands, still balled into fists, trembled visibly. She leaned forward, closing the gap, her voice vibrating with fury. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I dreamed of living with a target on my back, with strangers sending threats to kill me for who I fight for? I didn't choose this platform to cash in. I was given it, and I use it because